Hi, welcome to Module 1 of Inclusion of Students with Special Needs. So here we are at the start of our journey. Now, I'm not here to try to change your mind about inclusion. I'm here to open up, hopefully, some discussion, some new ways to look at things. Although a number of students have posted toward the end of class or sent me an email following class that this really was an epiphany for them as I looked at not only inclusion in how they teach, but inclusion in life practices and just every day how they live their lives. So whether that is going to be you or not, I'm not sure, but I do feel that we're off to a good start here in week 1 to get to the basis of really starting to understand what is inclusion. So I have a few points I want to go through. Everything, hopefully, that I talk about is going to link up with what's in the module. First things first, please post your biography or your introduction. If you haven't done that already, that's a requirement for Viterbo. Ties in with attendance and financial aid and all of that stuff. I've posted mine. You can post a picture or a couple pictures so we get to know you. Feel free to have some fun with it, especially in the last part of if you could do anything you wanted as a second career, what would you do? So and for mine I put down comedian, and yeah, so I don't have any material I can put out there right now, but I do feel it into that's present in everyday life and that we just don't recognize when we need to.
So I guess what I'm saying is let's never take yourself too seriously. And when you think about inclusion too, I mean, open and be accepting. So Viterbo Values, you'll watch the video about Viterbo and then answer some questions regarding the university. But I've been with Viterbo for 13 years. Now, I've instructed for other universities also, but none as long as I have with Viterbo. And I have no intentions of leaving teaching with Viterbo. A few things. One is it's a university based upon compassion, and it's been that way since day one. As a faculty member, I've been treated extremely well. When I first started out and did my first face-to-face class, and I had milk crates, and in every milk crate I had, here was week 1, okay, here was week 2, here was week 3, here was week 4, and that was kind of my way to get into it. Some of the instructors at that time had shown me some shortcuts, and eventually, I learned and got very good at a few things and was able to pass on some of my knowledge on to some of the future instructors. But it's an institution that really has its heart in the right place, and I think that's where you want to be, and that's where you are, and that's where you are. Another part of Viterbo is servant leadership, and that's one thing for me. I guess the older I've gotten, the more important I realize anything that you do, it's critical to be of utmost importance to be a servant leader, meaning that you're not worried about the trinkets and trophies that you might acquire, but more or less looking at the big picture and how you can help others to become the best that they can become, to reach their potential, and also that you're willing to stand up and lead the way when leading needs to be done, or else when something isn't maybe going correctly in a district or whatever, that you're willing to also be that voice of coming in and refocusing people on really what the purpose of the position is, and that's serving children. And sometimes we pull away from that, and that just happens with politics and everything else. But servant leadership and Viterbo, it's something I can feel instantly when I walk on the campus. So goals of public education. It's interesting because when public education started, really the goal was to have an educated populace, that there would be a standard level of reading and writing, that people would be able to understand
I guess there are civil obligations and democracy and going in then to business and trade and currency and all of that. I mean, when we really get to as education started, it's changed, obviously so much over the years. But one of the things that I want to talk about right now is, we think education is very scripted out at a federal level and then at a state level and local level. And we hear about things like No Child Left Behind, and now it's being replaced by, I believe, Every Student Succeeds or something similar to that. But really, when you break it down, and I say this because I researched this in my dissertation at UW-Madison, but what it comes down to at a federal level for educating students is that you act in the best interest of the child. And really, that's it. I mean, so you do have this legislation, legislation pieces come out, NCLB and all these conditions and stuff, but really once all of that's kind of pushed aside, it comes back to that peak of where what's in the legal statements within, within the federal level for education, and it is acting in the best interest of the child. And believe it, that's it. That's it. It comes down to that. Something very interesting is I read a research study that was conducted on 60 case studies that involved, at the crux of the case study, a definition of best interest of the child. In all 60 case studies, the definition was different. So what does that mean? It means that when you're acting in the best interest of the child, when you're a champion for inclusion, you have to follow your passion, you have to follow your instincts, and also know that, make a decision based upon what you feel is in the best interest of that child. And that's where I want you to ground yourself as we go into this class. Best interest of the child. Now, I'm not naive. I know you can't do something drastic and go against your, administration and board and all of that. But there are times too, in education where if you feel it's a situation that's not a match for you, maybe, you need to look for a different school or something like that. But that's one thing, never compromise acting in the best interest of the child. So let me just put that out there. So, today one of the things that is changing a lot when we look at what is the goal of public education, I want to tell a little story. So I recently visited a rural school, but not very small, and we talked about this question, the goal of public education. And it was a school district that defines itself as having generational poverty. So, a number of families that were poor, have children, and, they grow up, stay in the community. There's not a lot of employment. The employment that is there doesn't pay very well, not a lot of cultural enrichment. Not saying, the people are good or bad, because you come into that where people make judgments. No, just saying that this is just the way that it is. But in that setting, I was talking to a school principal, and in that discussion, what came out was the goal of public education for that elementary school was that the students have their innate needs met, and then after that, develop goals and are able to see themselves as productive, having a productive life, productive members of society, obviously in the future. So it kind of boiled down to two things, and one was innate needs being met, and the other was taking students from where they were at and helping them to focus on, hey, you can set goals, you have things that you can aim for. And of course, everything else weaves into that. That's going to be much different than a very, kind of affluent district that's in an urban area. But for this district, that was where they were centered, because that's where they needed to be. And here's an example. So the principal had the teachers ride the school buses. And the reason was to see where the kids lived from, and came from in their homes and everything. So what the teachers were observing, were homes that were in a state of kind of disrepair for the most part, or else if they would go in and visit inside of the house, there might be laundry on both sides. And I remember the principal said one of the teachers went inside a house, and I think there was chickens or a goat or something that was living inside. And again, I'm not painting this picture, please, of something that seems very abnormal or whatever, but just saying, we make assumptions about the lives that our kids live outside of school. So when you start out with something for inclusion, and you have PBIS and all these initiatives of social adherence to rules and so forth, kids, it's not that kids don't want to do that. Oftentimes it's that you can only get there once you bridge that step of innate needs. So what this principal did, and what the staff did, is they learned that most of the students didn't have toothbrushes. So every morning at that school, when the students arrive, they take out their toothbrush, they have shared toothpaste, and they go, and every single student brushes their teeth. Every student. And that's part of framed around responsibility for self, but it was a way to meet an innate need for the students. And once that was met, in addition to some other supporting factors such as more partnerships with the community as far as availability of clothing and food items. Once the innate needs were met, then suddenly PBIS behaviors and I guess what I would say pride in the school, the ability to set goals, academic performance, those all rose just as had been expected. But had that principal not had that vision to do that, and really I'm saying this is an act of inclusion to, you don't have some students who are, in an environment where there isn't food at home and toothbrush and whatever, and some that have that. I mean, you level that out, and everybody has those basic necessities met. So in chapter 1, I think it's really important just to look at, we've had a lot of attempts at inclusion throughout the years, and it's changed, and it continues to change. I remember I work at Wisconsin School for the Blind, which initially was started in the 1840s, and at that time, if you go back and look at what was done, I mean, a lot of agriculture and things like that at the school, and it was very trades oriented. But it was developed, of course, with the best interest of kids, in mind. And yet today we would look at something like that and think, that was, that was very much an exclusive setting. And you can look up Pennhurst, for example. If you type in Pennhurst mental health institution, and we can see where we went through, phases of society of trying to create institutions to help people, which actually, today appear very exclusionary, but at the time, was a way of society to, I think, try to embrace and provide support for people. And it was just the technology and the education just weren't there. I mean, people didn't know how to treat, mental health, autism, 100 years ago, and things like that. But so we look at things as barbaric, but I'm not sure they really were. The WEAC article, what I really love about the WEAC article is it separates out mainstreaming from inclusion. And there's a difference. And here it is in a nutshell. So mainstreaming is if you have a student with a special need or disability, and that student then is, for example, placed in a regular education classroom. It doesn't mean that the curriculum is being modified for them. It means physically, that's where they're at. Now, inclusion means that that student is within that setting, and there is a modification accommodation so they're able to participate, engage at some level in the curriculum, what's being instructed, and also that they have a social connection with their peers. What a lot of schools have done, they've said, we've gone full inclusion. And what they've really done is just gone full mainstreaming. And one of the things I want to share right away is full inclusion is not something that is embraced by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, or the law that basically why we have special education in schools. So for years you had NCLB, and now you have what has replaced it, but which is saying students need to perform at a certain level, all students, and that's our goal. And yeah, we should celebrate definitely growth, but it's not realistic that every student is going to attain 100%, because everybody's different. And but what was happening with NCLB is growth wasn't celebrated. It was just attainment. Now we get over here with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which created our IEPs and came down to least restrictive environment, meaning that you could have a full pull-out setting. You might have a student being educated on a different site, or a student might be fully included. Student might have part of their day in the regular education classroom, part in special ed, but just to get at it, that there's a range of services. And I can give an example. We had a student with severe anxiety when I was a director, and for the least restrictive environment for that child, for a while, we had a computer in that child's home, a monitor and a camera also in the classroom at school, and that student Skyped in, was able to Skype in and participate with her class, and eventually then was able to come into school for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, eventually became fully included again. But that was a form of inclusion. But mainstreaming is a term that also goes with tolerance. Inclusion goes with acceptance. Now, people have said teach tolerance. Personally, I don't believe in doing that, because tolerance is a basement level threshold. Tolerance is somebody walking down the street and refraining from saying something derogatory to someone of a different race or culture or whatever, and they're just holding back and they're walking past that person. That's tolerance. That I tolerate that you're here with me. Maybe I don't like it. I tolerate it though. We're better than that. What you want is acceptance. Acceptance is learning about the other person, their interest, about them, and then also about their culture. Really, I mean, we've been about acceptance as a society for a long time, but how this teach tolerance movement got started, I'm not really sure. But I tell people that, again, is a basement level threshold, and you want to be better than that. You want to be better than that. So one story, and then I'm going to wrap it up. I'll try to keep these down to about 20-25 minutes. But working at Wisconsin School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, it's a fascinating experience. It's a wonderful place to work, absolutely wonderful. And probably, I don't know, maybe 1/5 of the staff that I work with are visually impaired. So there were some staff that I would see at conferences when I was a director, 10 years ago. And, I never went up and had a conversation with any of these folks. I mean, you kind of watch them, find their way around, and I realized I lost out on getting to meet some fascinating people, and it was probably just because of anxiety and not knowing exactly how to introduce yourself to somebody who is blind. That's what it was, and I think that's not uncommon for us. Teachers. You get the student that comes in with a very special need that you haven't served before, and there's some apprehension until you get that professional development, break that ice, and then everything is on a much better path. But these are the folks now that I work with, and I absolutely love working with them, and we have such a great relationship and sense of humor and things that we can talk about. And I realized that, boy, just if I had gone out and made that introduction, the friends that I could have made, and the expansion of professional network. I don't feel bad about it, because I just think it's a natural human tendency to have some apprehension. If you're in a situation that you're not quite sure how to interact with the other person. But I'm telling you, as a servant leader, as an inclusive educator, to go and hammer down that barrier right away and get to know that student and get to know their parents no matter what. And it is absolutely amazing. I work with a visually impaired student who it's amazing. We come down for therapy, and one of the things that he wants to always do, stop at the lounge and buy me a soda, and I decline. But I always tell him I appreciate his generosity, and he's more concerned about others, than he is of himself. And boy, I look at him and think, you're really the epitome of servant leadership, and I appreciate that. So if you haven't received the book, as soon as you receive it, go through and read chapter 1. And for week 1, make sure you respond about the WEAC article that's up. But hopefully, if you haven't ordered the book, it's in the syllabus and it's posted here in the course, you'll be able to order it quickly and have that. And again, the class really builds off of that once we get into week 2 and start to move forward. But that's it. I welcome you again to the class. Please get in, go through the readings, and make posts. Go in and make posts. I will respond to many posts. I won't respond again to all of the posts. If you don't see me posting for a few days, don't worry. I can see the class back door. I'm monitoring things, but I will be an active poster. Typically in a class like this, I'll make 200 to 300 posts during the class. But be an active poster. That's going to be key. And don't worry if the vernacular isn't right, the spelling, and whatever. If you're sitting down, laptop's out, it's nighttime, and you're on the couch and you just want to give your thoughts on some of the posts, just go ahead and do that. I'm not going to nitpick on formatting on something like that. Nobody is. And please share, what your thoughts and what your feelings are, because hopefully this class is going to move your cheese a little bit. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But I think for some of you, and for me, I'll tell you, this class has definitely changed my perception of inclusion. And it does that every time I have students come through and they share their stories with me. It changes and makes me a better educator, makes me a better person. So I appreciate it. Thank you for hanging with me here for almost 24 minutes during our week 1 module. And I look forward to a great start to this class.